Hello there. What if I told you that the most interesting thing to happen to e-ink note-taking in a while is right around the corner? Maybe. That's the topic of today's video. We're going to talk specifically about the Viwoods AI Paper X1, which is basically a new product from a new company that just started a Kickstarter campaign just a few days ago. This is a Chinese company headquartered in Hong Kong, and they'll be releasing two devices. I'll put the specs here that feature traditional e-ink note-taking combined with more integrated AI functionality. The specs, as you can see, particularly on the larger 10.6 inch screen, very close to the book's 10.3 Go that just released a couple months ago. So really good specifications, at least as the hardware is concerned. The question, of course, is how will it actually perform in terms of software. The device itself won't be coming out for a few months. I'm not clear if it's September or October that it'll actually release, but we're going to talk about what we know about the device so far. I'll give my thoughts on it, and we'll kind of see where that leaves us in the end. So let's go ahead and jump on in to the company's websites and get a sense of what the company is telling us about what these devices can do. So to kind of best highlight what this device is and its potential for what it can do, we're just going to go to the web pages that Viwoods has set up. We're going to start with their pre-launch page, and then we'll mostly spend time here because I think it does the best job of explaining the device, at least as far as I can tell. And then we'll go to their main website. I'll put the links to both in the description. It's possible that the pre-launch page won't be around once the device is launched in the time of this video. If that's the case, then there won't be a link. But if it is still active, I'll be sure to put that link in there. So we start off here with an image of the device, a kind of a nice profile image with the stylus. And then you can see their logo, which is, a nice little logo. Here's an example of some of the specifications, which again are very much like what we saw with the Books Go. Slightly thinner, slightly lighter, pretty much the same dimensions though. Those differences are pretty nominal, including down to the 300 ppi, albeit with a larger screen. It does have a larger battery than we normally see in 10-inch devices, and what this means isn't clear because it depends on how well they optimize their software. So if they do a good job in optimizing that, then yes, you'll get better battery life, and that will make a difference, and of course vice versa as well. We won't know until we get the device and do some testing. It has 128 gigabytes of storage, doesn't appear to have any type of expandability, with one exception, and I'll get to that toward the end of these web pages, but not the way that Books has, where you can have an SD card expansion slot. That doesn't appear to be the case here. Now this is one of the reasons why I think that this site's a little bit better than their website, because they go into a little bit more detail about what these AI features are. And we'll start with the top image on the left side, which is titled Intelligent Content Recognition and Summarization. And you can see in the picture you have an image of being inside a document and then the menu when you press the AI button. The only thing I'll point out here is that what they're kind of talking about here is not particularly novel. The Books devices, if you have a document open in the Reader app and then you go to the split screen, there is an AI interface there where you have the document on one side and then the AI chatbot on the other. And in that particular case, they have a number of macros, which include summarizing the document, and you can set the number of words you want that summary to be, etc. So this is not a particularly new feature, and just so you know that exists. My own personal experience is I haven't found the summary in Books to be that particularly helpful, but I haven't played with it too much. I just kind of toyed around with it a bit, and so we'll see how it is here as well. In the next image, you see it says Content Refinement and Storytelling Generation. This is interesting. It looks like you're in a calendar app with some ability to take notes down below, and you can generate an article in the drop-down bar. Not sure what that means. I guess it's taking your notes and then creating a narrative out of it. I'm not quite sure. The next box over, it says Document Summarization Grammar Polish. So that's kind of cool. to have that type of ability. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what that means in practical terms. And does it apply to just text documents, or does it apply to notes? In this particular case, it looks like we're in a document. It's really the next row where I start to kind of perk up a little bit more, and things get a little bit more interesting and potentially viable. So on the left side, you'll see it says content analysis and AI article generation, which kind of by itself isn't that exciting or novel, but then you can see in the image that they're in a note. You can see the handwriting there. I don't know if the camera can make it out, but it's a dot template. So it's interesting. This is when now you can start to use handwriting recognition, or they have text conversion here, as a way of looking at your notes and then starting to apply some of these AI tools. And this is where you can start to see some potential value, depending, of course, on how they actually implement it. Next box over in a similar fashion is meeting minutes and AI textualization. And there'll actually be an example of this meeting minutes thing on the web page, so we'll show that. So it was kind of interesting. The example wasn't great, but there was a twist to it, which I did find a little bit fascinating. So we'll see that in just a little bit. And then finally, this idea of daily organization and reporting. The reporting looks like it might be kind of fun. I'm not sure that's going to be a practical tool, just kind of guessing at what it might entail. But the organization may refer, because there's been references to this in other materials, to kind of helping to build to-do lists. And we don't see any specific examples of that. This is as close as we come, but that's why I think it's related to that. And depending on how that's set up and how that works, that could be a huge value add. So it's one of the things I'm definitely curious about. Now they talk about having voice command input, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but there are 3 buttons on the bottom of the device. They look like haptic buttons, not necessarily physical buttons. And the one on the very right is the AI button, and that's what's being pressed in the image on the right. So what this does basically is it appears to bring up a chatbot, and then you can enter in your query verbally. Now, I will say, of course, having chatbot apps on a device isn't new. I think Bigme was the first one to natively provide that on their devices. Books has done that as well, but none of them have this level of integration. And normally I would say that I don't generally go over to the chatbots in either my Books or Bigme devices, but would it be different when you're just a button click away and it's that convenient? And I do use Copilot on Edge, for example, to get to specific points of information. So I could see a potential use case here where maybe I'm doing some notes, I want to gather some information, and I can use this device through their chatbot to get that information. So having it this convenient, that might make it more engaging, and it might make more sense to be part of a workflow. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out in practice. They do have cloud storage, and you'll notice in the image in the middle, it looks to me very much like how Supernote has structured their application, particularly, not so much necessarily the desktop application, but it reminds me of when you can connect your Supernote on the Wi-Fi network and view your files on a browser. So it's kind of that similar feel. But it looks like you're able to read your notes off of the device, in this case clearly in a web browser in the middle case, and it looks like it's implying that it can be done maybe on a phone in the other images. Not quite clear what the exact functionality will be there, but that's at least what's being implied. This is an interesting feature. This is something the Supernote can do, where you can have an email client on the Supernote, and then you can reply to emails using the stylus to reply. So if I wrote my reply in the email, the end user will see what I wrote. It won't be a file that's attached to the reply. The writing will be visible in the body of the email. Looks like that's what they're suggesting here in this particular image. And if it is the same as a Supernote, it's a pretty handy feature to have. This is something that I'm super intrigued by. This is automatic document titling. And here's the thought process here. And this is just me kind of philosophizing, if you will. It's not anything we know that this device can do. But in theory, if you have the ability to kind of automatically apply a title, then you have the ability to do a one-touch beginning of a note. So currently, in most cases with books, Remarkable, and Supernote devices, you can click on a button to start a notebook, and then you end up with a window. And that window has a number of features, usually things like doing the title, as well as selecting your template, and then you click to create, or whatever the button is to make your notebook. In this particular case, it looks like that there's this opportunity that they will automatically create your document title. And if that results in one click, opening up a notebook, that quickly, that might be a nice little feature. Nothing earth-shattering, but if you add up features like this together, then you're starting, the parts start to add up to a much larger sum. And so, it's intriguing that this is here, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it works. However, I'm also a stickler for grammar, and I don't like the fact that it generated a title here and did a lowercase for the first letter. I'm old school that way, but hopefully that's something that they'll have addressed in the final version. It is interesting, and again, I think taking from the Remarkable playbook, that they focus on sketching. And so that's a feature here, and they definitely highlight that in a lot of their materials. So this is an interesting image. So this is running Android 13. There's no mention of having access to the Google Play Store. So I think the safe assumption is that you don't have access to the Google Play Store. And this image actually seems to corroborate that. It looks like there will be an app store on the device, and it'll have a handful of apps. In this case, we've got a calculator app, Chrome for the browser, Libby, Kindle. I'm not sure what the next icon is. It kind of looks like OneDrive, but I don't think that's what it is. The New York Times and BBC News. So definitely going with the idea they probably have their own app store, and haven't heard anything in terms of whether you can sideload apps or not. Beyond that, they have the specifications of the device, and then they go into details of the device that we've actually already kind of covered in that initial grid that I shared. But the one thing I will note here is that it does have the ability to attach a Bluetooth keyboard, but also to connect to the USB port, a keyboard, or a mouse. And also this OTG devices, or on the go, could mean access to a memory card, and that might be a workaround on the fact that they don't have storage expansion ability. So if you're someone that puts a lot of media on your devices and a little concerned about the fact that you can't go above 128, that might be a potential workaround, depending on your situation. So that's all the highlights that I thought was relevant and useful to share on their pre-launch site. Let's take a quick look at their regular website and see just what other kind of nuggets we can garner about the device. Okay, so here we are, and we're in the beginning of their webpage, and they're running this kind of really nice promotional video. I really like the way that they're positioning the device as an advertising. It's clear how the device can be used. They're making nice use cases, at least at a basic level, in terms of how the device can be used. I just think they've done a good job here with the marketing, and again, feels very similar to some of the marketing you get from Remarkable. One specific thing, though, I do want to focus on here is if you look at the images, notice the stylus. It's hard to say, but it seems to me in these images the stylus is a little bit larger than the traditional thickness that we associate with books devices or with the Kindle Scribe and what have you. And if that's the case, I really welcome that. I think a thicker stylus is a lot more comfortable to hold, and that would be a positive change. I don't know that for sure, but that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from these videos. This is kind of interesting, and it's kind of a rare misstep, at least it seems that way, in their marketing materials. If you look at the image on the right, it says replaceless stylus. This doesn't really make any sense. Styluses aren't normally considered quote-unquote replaceable. You can obviously, switch styluses if you're using a Wacom layer, and I think that's the case in this device, but I haven't actually seen that be confirmed. But it looks like the tips are standard Wacom tips. So I think what they mean, I think they mean that the stylus doesn't need to be replaced, but it's unfortunate because it kind of gives the insinuation that maybe it's the tips that they're referring to, something similar to a ceramic tip on a Supernote, which never needs to be replaced. But again, I've seen the tips in other materials. They look like standard plastic tips. So it's just kind of an awkward phrasing. And of course, why would you have 12 of them if they don't need to be replaced. So when they say replace the stylus, they really mean the stylus, and it's kind of an odd way of phrasing it. You don't normally see that, and that's not unique. So that the one misstep that I've discerned from their marketing. Now, this is that AI example that I kind of talked about in the other website. And what you have here is you're seeing, a template that's been filled in from a meeting. And then if you slide this button over, then it converts that template into kind of a summarized version of the meeting. And at first glance, I don't actually like the example. I actually would prefer the actual meeting minutes over the translation. I don't like the formatting of it. It doesn't flow for me. So not a great example from that regard. However, there's an interesting thing here. It took me a few times to realize that is interesting. So if you look at the template at the top, it says meeting name, place, and speaker. And then you look at the translation. Those items are included in the translation, meaning they not only took the writing and made a summary of it, they took the template as well. Very interesting. I'm not sure what the practical application of that is, but it is intriguing that their software is designed to do that. Okay, the last thing I'll just call out here is that they do have a 100-day trial. This is very similar to Remarkable. I don't remember if Remarkable has 100 days or if it's 90 or if it's a slightly different number, but it's very similar. Maybe it's even 30. I just don't remember. But it's a period of time in which you can receive the device, see if it really works for you, see if the AI features are actually useful. And if they're not, then you can return it, usually for a full refund. And I think that's what's being implied here. So that's the right move. It's a smart move. And again, just another really concrete sign of how they are going after the Remarkable user and how they're marketing this device, which is absolutely the right move. Okay, so before I start getting into my thoughts on the device, kind of summarizing and giving my analysis, after I did the videos with the company's web pages, GoodEReader dropped a video of their own, and it was fairly interesting. They spent about 25 minutes talking about the device. I'm going to give a few highlights from that. I'm not going to replay their video, but I will put a link in the description if you're interested in looking at it. Okay, my first takeaway from that is that it was good to see the device. They kind of did almost a full unboxing. I don't think the device will be the final version, particularly the software, but it looked like it was a nearly complete device, and certainly was complete in terms of how the hardware looked. So that was pretty impressive. I liked what I saw in terms of how the device looked and that sort of thing. So it looks like the hardware is on point. And actually, because this is a Kickstarter campaign that the company's starting, it's kind of good actually to see the product. Sometimes Kickstarter campaigns are ways of just launching a device. It's just a vehicle to kind of get interest and get people involved and that sort of thing, a marketing tool. But sometimes Kickstarter is really about, we need the money in order to make this thing happen, and it may or may not happen depending on how things go. So obviously, of those two, you really want it to be the marketing side because you want to eventually receive the product, and it looks like that's the case here, which is kind of a nice little bit of a sigh of relief on that front. The AI features that were kind of displayed in the video seemed fairly limited. I think kind of the promise of bringing in features that would help, like kind of note-taking, what have you, I'm not sure I really saw a lot of that. I did see good integration of the AI chatbots into the device. We knew we were going to get that already with the AI button. This kind of confirmed that. But also within the documents and notebooks, a lot of the features there are really just kind of like shortcuts to kind of AI features that we're used to. And I don't know how particularly valuable those are. The analyze content or generate an article really kind of came up with things that, at least in the examples in the video, I didn't find particularly useful. I'll give you an analogy. Have you ever clicked on an article where the header is kind of interesting, but the body of the article is mostly fluff? I'll give you an example. Let's say that you come across an article that says something like Sting names the one band he wishes never existed. And you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I want to see what band this is that Sting hates. So you go into the article, and what you find is you've got to go 2/3, maybe 3/4 down that article in order to see the one quote that the headline was alluding to. And all that text up to that point is just a bunch of fluff that you probably already know. And they do it for word count to generate real estate so they can put more ads in the article. I mentioned that example because that type of fluff that you're used to reading in these articles is the kind of fluff that I kind of got in some of these examples that GoodEReader did on the device. So on one hand, they did validate that kind of this more integration of AI chatbots into the device seemed to be in place and seemed to work the way that you would, which is a good thing. For example, if you're in your notes or if you're just on the device and you want to do a query for something very specific, like what year was the original Remarkable released, then that is when that type of tool would be helpful. That's great. But what I didn't see is much in the way of additional tools that would kind of help accentuate the note-taking experience. Now, of course, this is an earlier version of the software, and they did mention that there will be weekly updates. So hopefully that's something that kind of evolves. And I'll give some examples later in the video on just hypothetical things I think they could do that might actually add a lot of value. But the one thing I will point out is that the one feature we kind of touched on with the videos from Viwoods, which is the naming the file. That's not an AI tool, really. It's just a handwriting recognition tool based on the title that you put on top of the notebook. So that wasn't an example of AI in action, as it turns out, which actually isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'll have to see how that works in action, but I still think that's actually kind of a cool feature. Again, you go right into the notebook, you can put the title on at any time, and it'll automatically title the notebook. I still kind of like the idea, but certainly not an example of how they're leveraging AI to help with the notebooks. In addition to that, there was no evidence of anything having to do with creating to-do lists. They did talk about having tags, which we already knew they had, but nothing related to kind of AI doing some sort of analysis to create that, which is something I was hoping to see. But it's good in this demo to know that for now it looks like tags are probably the extent of it. But again, that's another area that hopefully will be kind of developed and added in down the line, but of course no guarantees on that front. Okay, so now that we've had a chance to kind of see the device through marketing and through this video from GoodEReader, how do we summarize what this thing is? And I think the best way is it's kind of merging, if you will, between kind of the specs that we've seen with the Go 10.3 and the more simpler interface that we see with the Remarkable 2. And here I'll put an image, a still image of that interface to show how similar it is to Remarkable. Now, this is just in this one particular example. There are a number of other menus that do deviate from what you see on a Remarkable, but nevertheless, they're sticking to that kind of theme of trying to keep things simple, not overly complicated. And if I were to explain kind of that system UI and layout, that's much more in the Remarkable camp than it is in, say, a Supernote or Books camp. But from a hardware perspective, certainly the similarities with the Go 10.3 are pretty striking. Some of the key differences being that there's a flexible screen on the Viwoods on the 10-inch version. Kind of be interesting to see what that means exactly. Is that kind of like a Mobius screen where it kind of gives? Not quite sure about that and didn't get any sense of that from the GoodEReader video. There's more storage on the Viwoods, but there isn't an ability to add additional storage as it appears. So that's one difference from the Go as well. Again, a larger battery in the Viwoods, but we're not quite sure what to make of that, and a couple other minor differences. But I would say fundamentally very close in terms of specifications between the two. But in order for this device to be successful, it can't just emulate Remarkable or the hardware specifications of the Go. It's got to be able to deliver on the AI elements of it. That's the thing that makes it different. That's the thing that makes it interesting. And if it can't deliver on that, then it's going to have a tough time in the marketplace. But if it can deliver, that's a different story. And that's the promise of this device. It all comes down to how they can implement AI features to bring in new functionality into the device that we're not used to in e-note-taking devices with e-ink screens. So that's that's really what the Viwoods device hinges on. So when I look at this device and I look at the challenges that it's facing, there's 4 things in particular that stand out to me. So the first thing is just getting the basics right. And this is something that we've known, companies like Remarkable, Books, and Supernote for years have been honing their note-taking apps. And we kind of take for granted the work that they've done in that area, but it wasn't easy. There was a lot of effort, time and sweat put into that. And it's not just a simple thing for a new company to come in and just kind of start off with their own note-taking app and expect everything to work great. We've definitely seen examples where things are not as smooth sometimes with some new entrants into the market, or some basic functionality isn't there, or it's too buggy. So it's not a given that they'll be able to handle the basics. Now, I did notice, for what it's worth, that in the GoodEReader video, it did look generally like the device was snappy, to the extent that they kind of went into some of the details of the various screens. It looked like the software was fairly well along. They didn't go into all screens, and it's possible they're still developing the software. We just don't know. But the initial impressions seem to be positive. But nevertheless, this will remain a challenge. How buggy will the device be? How responsive will it be overall? All of that really is something that a new company has to prove. So that's the first challenge I'll call out. The second challenge, the more obvious one, I suppose, is that, they've got to make the AI features work. And I do like the idea of the integration of the ChatGPT in the various apps that run on the device, plus the ability just kind of to run it at a touch of a button. I think that's interesting and that adds value. But in order for this device really to be successful, it kind of has to go beyond that. So let me give you some examples, and these are just ideas that I have, but I'm just trying to give a sense of what it might mean to do that. So, for example, imagine the device certainly has handwriting recognition. Imagine there's AI working in the background that looks at your notes, identifies unusual words, right? Throws out the ands, the these, the words that are generally common. Imagine labeling those and indexing those unusual words. So when you have multiple notebooks and you've got an unusual word that gets indexed, if you click on that word, you can then find a pane that shows all the other pages and notebooks where that word exists that you can then hyperlink to, or quickly hyperlink back. So some way basically of finding connections between notes and to be able to move between notes using kind of this index system. That would be a great function for AI because it's something that would work in the background. It would just be there when you needed it, and would be a pretty slick tool in terms of navigating and potentially finding connections that you hadn't thought about before. So that's one potential idea. Another idea might be, let's say that you've taken notes for a meeting, and if you're like me, you're probably taking kind of shorthand notes. And it's for you. It's not necessarily very pretty because you're taking notes as you go along. What if AI has the ability not just to convert your notes to text recognition, but to then understand those notes so they can format them better, maybe make the grammar not perfect because you don't want a lot of fluff in there, but a little bit better so it's a little easier to read for someone. Things aren't as shorthand as might otherwise be with normal notes. And of course, you wouldn't expect that to be perfect. But if the AI could do like 90% of the heavy lifting, and then you go back in and then do the rest of the tweaking, and then you can share your notes with other people because it's legible now, that would be a great note-taking AI feature that no one currently does. So those are just a couple examples, and just my examples. These aren't anything that Viwoods has talked about in their materials. But if they can add tools like that add value in ways we haven't seen before, then they can deliver on this promise. But it's a big ask. Now, I think it is possible, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, because I think some people are a little bit fatigued about using the phrase AI and broken promises in the past. But I don't think it's a large leap of faith to go from where we are now with our large language models to features that can be applied to devices that bring these types of functionalities to bear. I think that's definitely within the realm of where the technology is at now, but the application's hard. And that's the key that Viwoods is going to have to figure out as they add this functionality to their device. It's a big challenge, and they're not guaranteed to be up for it. So that's my second concern. My third concern is around the price point. Now, I'll put the prices up here. You can see the initial Kickstarter prices, but pay more attention to the prices with a line through it. Those are pretty high prices for these types of devices. I've been following this industry for a while now, and 500 really is kind of a magic number. So when you put a device out there and you're selling above 500, the further you sell above 500, the more you're going to see a reduction in the sale of units because of that price point. So this is a very prohibitive price point that they're suggesting. Now, there's two possibilities here. One possibility is that the prices are exactly as they're indicating, and that's concerning. But the other possibility is this is just the marketing. I was part of a Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign, I can't remember, last year with the Big Me all-in-one Eink monitor and PC. And they advertised in that campaign that you can buy the monitor for something like $1,800, and then eventually when they would go to retail, they'll sell it for $3,000. That's not what happened. What happened is that when they went to retail, they actually started selling the device at $2,000. So a little bit more than what they had in the campaign, but nowhere near what they were indicating as MSRP at that time. So a little bit of marketing, and that might be the case here. It could be that they're saying, hey, come get these deals because this is going to be a lot more expensive in the future, when the reality is it'll only be a little bit expensive. And hopefully that's what's going to happen. If it doesn't happen that way, then I think they've made a mistake in terms of pricing. And I actually think what they should have done is gone with a subscription model. Because their argument is they're selling at a high price because of the fact that the AI features are free. And sure enough, if you have a subscription to the Copilot tools within Office 365, that's $20 a month. If you're subscribing to OpenAI's models, they charge about $20 a month. So those are a couple examples. That can add up really quickly. So if the AI is there, as we just talked about in the previous challenge, the value is there, it would be better to have the device at a price point that would sell more units, and then your subscription then would be for those AI features. They may not have gone down that road because of what happened with Remarkable on their subscription, but I would argue that that's a totally different story. When Remarkable came out, they basically were doing a subscription for things that had been free previously or are free on other devices, like cloud storage, for example. And so that's where a lot of the consternation came from. This is different. We're used to having to pay for quality AI, and that would still be the challenge, right? You would still have to justify why people would subscribe to it. But if you can do that, then people would do that. And that, I think, would make more sense than trying to sell at this really high price point. So that price point, if true, is a real concern and a huge challenge for this company. The last thing I'll point to is around security. Now, security is always an issue, particularly if you're using your device at work or you're planning to store really sensitive information on your device. If you're using it at home, then it's not as huge of an issue. It just depends, obviously. Now, for me, as an example, I use the Supernote. That's the device I use as my daily driver. I use it at work. But in order to do that, I don't log into the account. I rarely have Wi-Fi on. And when I do, it's only to back up my files onto Google Drive in their proprietary format, or to download firmware updates. That's it. So in other words, I've disconnected from a number of Supernote services in order to maintain an acceptable level of security for my work notes. But I can do that. I don't have to do an account on Supernote. Now, in theory, the same is true for Viwoods. You don't have to be online. But the whole idea of the device is these AI features which require you to be online. At least that's my supposition. I don't think the processing power of the device is going to be sufficient to have AI on the device itself. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're using cloud services to do that, and that's a security risk. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying anything about Viwoods as a company. I'm not making any accusations that they have security issues. I'm just saying that when you're sharing your data online, that increases the chances that you might have a security issue. And in some cases, that risk, just that risk alone, is unacceptable. So that's a huge barrier for this device. And it's something people are going to have to consider. So those are really the broadest challenges I see. I mean, where would this product fail? They're either not going to get the basics right, they're not going to get the AI that differentiates them or adds value, they're not going to get the pricing right, or people aren't going to buy them because of these security issues. I think those are the major arguments, conceptually anyway, against the Viwoods device, and there's a lot to overcome there. And so that's definitely a concern. Now, one thing I want to address, and this was reflected on a lot of posts on Viwoods' Facebook page and a number of replies that folks were making, is that you can definitely get a sense of a lot of pessimism around this idea of AI, that, AI is all about hype in these comments, and, so this is not going to succeed because, we've been made all these promises of AI, but what's happened of it? And I actually don't agree with that sentiment at all. True, there's definitely been a lot of hype as it relates to AI. There's no question about that. But there's also been areas where AI has been very successful. And I think that's where some of the buzz is coming from, which is resulting in some of the hype. I'll give you some examples. I used to only do Google searches, right? Or web browser searches in the URL bar. I'm doing about half of my searches now through Copilot, which is AI. And that's specifically when I'm looking for specific pieces of information. I just find it's way more efficient to do it that way. And I think that's actually been a valid tool that's worked well. Another example is I was in a position where I was creating these documents. And this is very kind of nonfiction documents, something I do kind of in a standard course. And, I had all the material that I wanted to write in bullets, but I just didn't want to go through the tedious nature of writing those out. So I fed those into a ChatGPT model, gave my query parameters to be specific about kind of how I wanted the output to look and the formatting of it. And again, I'm feeding it the exact content. I'm just having them write it out, and it was spectacular. I actually got a compliment based on that writing, about how well written it was. So it's clear that there are areas where AI right now does a really fantastic job. And I think that and I've talked about this a little bit earlier, what could be a value add for AI in note-taking is something well within the capabilities of where AI is at now. This is not a promise of the future necessarily, because I think a lot of that functionality is there. The challenge is how to apply it. So I kind of push back against some of the pessimism. They may not make it because they don't find how to execute it properly, but AI definitely is in a position that could make a difference and could add tools that makes e-ink note-taking better. At least that's my opinion on that. So what are my overall thoughts? We've kind of talked about some of the promise of this device. We've certainly gone into some detail in terms of the major challenges that this company and these devices face. So what do I think overall? Well, first off, I'm really optimistic about how they've marketed the device. They understand that they need to go after the remarkable market and those types of users. That's the biggest market out there in terms of e-ink note-taking. So it's very smart that they did that, and their marketing hits all the right notes in that regard. They're going to have to continue to market. If they really want to be successful, they're going to have reviews in PC Mag, The Verge, Tom's Hardware, all the major kind of tech review sites. That's where they're going to have to get a lot of traction, and they'll have to do that, of course, by executing on this AI. And I have no idea if they're going to be able to execute on the AI other than this integration of the chat bots that we talked about already, which seems to be working well. But beyond that, just who knows? Have no idea. But I'm definitely in. I'm definitely willing to give it a try. I'm definitely looking forward to kind of reviewing this device. So you will find out in this channel exactly how well Viwoods meets these challenges or doesn't meet these challenges, if the case may be. I'm excited about it. I do think this is potentially the most interesting thing to happen with e-note-taking. At least the potential is there. But whether they execute on that potential is a big question mark. We just have no idea, and we won't know until it comes out. But I'm going to have fun waiting and discovering when it does. So that's my take on it. If you have any thoughts or comments, please pop those down there, and I'll be sure to reply to it. And as soon as the device shows up, I'll start reviewing it. All right. Until then, I'll see you next time.